It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villeminot. Hi, Flo.
Hi, Jeannie.
This week we're going to focus on Notre-Dame Cathedral, which is reopening to the public after, of course, that devastating fire that nearly destroyed it in 2019. And much more than just a place of worship or a popular tourist destination, Notre-Dame is also part of the very heart and soul that captures the capital. And in many ways, its history mirrors that of the capital as well.
Absolutely, and I wanted to let you in on some fun facts and lesser-known details about what the Parisians often lovingly call la vieille dame, the old lady, because Notre-Dame is very old, over 860 years old. The first stone was laid down in 1163, and it took almost 200 years to complete. And all this means that there were several waves of construction. And so Notre-Dame is a mismatch, if you will, a mismatch of different architectural techniques and styles. You can really see all this evolve through the facade of Notre-Dame. And there's also a lot of history under Notre-Dame. Ile de la Cité, where Notre-Dame is located, was once a Gallo-Roman city known as Lutetia. This was the city that was there before it became Paris. And in the 60s, there were plans, you can see it here, to build an underground parking garage under Notre-Dame, but workers discovered ruins that are now kept in an archaeological crypt that you can visit.
Now, Notre-Dame, of course, today is considered one of the finest examples of French Gothic architecture. It's got those flying buttresses, the incredible rose windows, and in its over 860-year history, Notre-Dame has really seen it all. In fact, the cathedral was almost destroyed several times before the fire, for example, during the French Revolution.
The French Revolution of 1789 was a moment of upheaval in France, and this is also mirrored in the history of Notre-Dame. The cathedral was used as an enormous warehouse to store food. In 1793, during the very dark ages following the revolution, it was rededicated to the cult of reason and then to the cult of the supreme being. All this was part of an attempt at de-Christianizing the country by the revolutionaries. And this actually brings us to one of my favorite stories about Notre-Dame. You can see these kings here. Back in the day, there were 28 sculptures of the kings of Judah that were on the facade of Notre-Dame Cathedral. And even though they represented biblical figures, they were pulled down and decapitated by the revolutionaries as a symbol of monarchy. And actually, they were lost to the world until they were rediscovered by accident almost 200 years later.
Nous les avons retrouvés, je dois dire par le plus grand des hasards, puisque nous avons fait des travaux qui consistaient à faire communiquer deux sous-sols, et donc à creuser dans cette cour, où nous sommes tombés sur quelque chose qui avait l'air d'un mur, et qui était cet ensemble de têtes très soigneusement ensevelies en direction de Notre-Dame, par respect pour leur origine première.
All right, Flo, before the fire, some 13 million people visited Notre-Dame every year, making it the most visited monument in France and in Europe. But it wasn't always so popular. In fact, many people credit both Napoleon Bonaparte and Victor Hugo for saving Notre-Dame from ruin.
That's right. When Napoleon Bonaparte decided to have his 1804 coronation as emperor, where he famously put his own crown on his head, he decided to hold it at Napoleon, to kind of at Notre-Dame, to bring it back into fashion. But Notre-Dame actually took another battering during the Napoleonic Wars. And actually, Paris officials even considered tearing it down. And this outraged a young author named Victor Hugo to raise awareness about the cathedral and about Gothic architecture in general. He wrote his very famous novel, Notre-Dame de Paris, in 1831. Now, it's often translated as the Hunchback of Notre-Dame, but actually the bell ringer Quasimodo is not the main character. The main character is Notre-Dame. Victor Hugo used the cathedral as a personification of France.
Ce qui était considéré comme une vieillerie des temps passés devient quelque chose qui peut être mis en valeur par les Français et les rendre fiers de leur passé.
The book was an immediate success and actually led to a major restoration in 1843 that was overseen by an architect named Eugène Viollet-le-Duc.
Now, that architect added many features that people are familiar with today at Notre-Dame, including many of the gargoyles. The gargoyles, of course, those beasts perched up on their towers that give a sense of mystery and fantasy to all the facade of Notre-Dame.
And it's actually our word du jour. The French term for gargoyle is gargouille.
So, hard to say.
Exactly, gargouille. Say that 10 times times in a row. So these are these figures that act as waterspouts. When they're not waterspouts, they're called chimeras. And so during the 19th century restoration that was led by Viollet-le-Duc, many of the original gargoyles from the Middle Ages were actually replaced with new sculptures, all of them full of symbolism.
Vous avez un corps d'oiseau, hein, ici. Vous avez des pattes animales. Vous avez une gueule, mettons, qui peut ressembler à celle d'un chien. C'est-à-dire que vous avez ces éléments hétérogènes, et ces éléments hétérogènes, eh bien, symbolisent, si vous voulez, ce qui n'est pas normal, ce qui est le chaos, c'est-à-dire ce qui est l'esprit du mal.
Flo, we're running out of time. There are so many fun facts about Notre Dame that we just can't mention. But go ahead, just leave us with a few.
So I haven't had time to tell you about the organ, which is considered one of the biggest in France. Also, the bells, they all have names. For instance, the largest bell, the bourdon, is called Emmanuel, not like the president. And just one last fun fact before we go. Notre-Dame is point zero. The cathedral marks the center of Paris and the point from which all the roads to and from the capital are measured. I guess you could say all roads lead to Notre-Dame.
Florence Villeminot, thank you so much for that look at Notre-Dame. And don't forget, if you have any of your own questions about France or the French, you can always tweet Flo at Flo Villeminot for French Connections.